Make Walters your spot for this NFL season. All indoor TVs are preset and are first come, first serve. They're proud to show every NFL game every week.
I've said it time and time again, but you win with people, right? And if we are going to achieve that, we want people that carry themselves with joy, that through the ups and the downs, they maintain a really optimistic attitude, right? Folks that are humble and, as Greg Popovich likes to say, have gotten over themselves. We want folks of high integrity, right? And that doesn't mean just, not stealing or not cheating or not lying. That means folks that are dependable, that are accountable, folks that when they say they're going to do something, they do it, right? And folks that are going to work, right? Those are all traits that we very much are going to hold sacred. And then last but not least, we want folks that are competitive.
And welcome to Nats Chat, along with MASNsports.com Nationals insider Mark Zuckerman. I'm Al Galdi, host of the Al Galdi podcast. We say happy Halloween, and we say hello. It is nice to be with you for this first installment of the podcast for the Nats 2025-2026 offseason. An offseason that we expected to be busy, has taken a little while to get going, but the offseason is getting going. We're doing episodes this offseason when news warrants, and we do have news that warrants. Reports on Thursday morning that the Washington Nationals are hiring Blake Butera as manager. He's 33 years old. He will be the youngest manager in MLB since the immortal Frank Quilisi for the Minnesota Twins in 1972. Blake Butera, he has been with the Tampa Bay Rays organization as either a player, a coach, or an executive since June 2015. Most recently was the Rays' senior director of player development. He has never played or coached above the single A level of professional baseball, but he is becoming the manager of the Nats. And how about the timing here? Thursday was October 30th, 2025, 6 years to the day of the Nats winning the 2019 World Series. There's something poetic about this Blake Butera news breaking on the anniversary of the Nats winning the World Series. As we have discussed on this podcast, not much since that day has gone well for the Nats franchise. The hope is that things are starting to change with Paul Taboni as president of baseball operations. And Mark, the Nats now have the youngest head of baseball operations in MLB in the 35-year-old Taboni, and will have the youngest manager in MLB in the 33-year-old Butera. There years ago, when we were kids, on ABC was a television show called 30-something. Now, I never watched it. I was not allowed to watch that kind of stuff as a child. But there was a television show called 30-something, and that is the theme now for the Nats. Paul Taboni at 35, Blake Butera at 33, incoming as the Nats' next manager.
My parents were big 30-something fans, so I remember being on. I may have caught a glimpse of it here and there, but I didn't watch it myself. I will say that, and you probably feel the same way, I've never felt so old in all of my currently 49 years of life to know that I'm now covering a team with a GM who's only 35 and a manager who's only 33. I've gotten used to, for a while now, the idea of the players being much younger than me. This is the first time I've covered a GM and a manager who are not just younger than me, but considerably younger than me. I'll be honest here. Prior to 10 a.m. on Thursday morning, I had never heard of Blake Butera. I'm just going to put that out there. I'm sure a lot of people probably had the same reaction. This was not somebody that was on my radar. It was not a name that had gotten out. And credit to the Nationals for keeping that under wraps. They clearly saw something in him that made them decide he is the right guy for this job. And as you start to learn more about him, you can understand what those reasons would be. I think the primary one is that this is somebody who has spent the last decade working for a Tampa Bay Rays organization that, above all else, has been known for developing young prospects and turning them into big leaguers. They haven't had a ton of success at the big league level. They reached a World Series. They've made the playoffs. They haven't gotten all the way over that hump, but they have consistently drafted and developed extremely well, and this guy was a part of all that. Now, how much a part of it was he? I don't know. That's up for debate. We may find out. You're talking about somebody who managed only a few seasons at low levels of ball. I mean, this is low A ball, the Charleston River Dogs. This would be the equivalent of the Nationals hiring a guy who managed the Fred Nats. They're in the same league, the Carolina League. So that's not even Wilmington before you get to Harrisburg, Rochester. It's low level of A ball. And then the last couple of years as their senior director of player development. So you see where the background is and you understand what the appeal of that would be. The concern for me would be somebody with that little experience. It's not even really about the age, it's about the lack of experience. This is not a former big league player. Played a couple years in the minors, not highly. He was a 35th round pick out of Boston College. They don't even have that many rounds anymore. It only goes to 20. So the challenge for him, among many other things, is going to be walking into a big league clubhouse and commanding the respect of these players who, yes, are very young themselves and very inexperienced. But there's still something to be said for you walk in there and you've played the game before, or you've managed the game before, or you've managed at the high levels of the minor leagues before. And this guy doesn't have that. So the onus is going to be on him to win them over and convince them that he is the guy they should respect. And he very may well do that. This may turn out to be a fantastic hiring, but there's a gamble there because of the lack of experience.
This is a bold hire by Paul Taboni, no doubt. This is a roll of the dice hire by Paul Taboni, no doubt. And if it works, Taboni looks like a genius. And if it doesn't work, if this guy, Blake Butera, ends up being in way over his head, it's going to make our guy, Mr. Taboni, not look so great. So we acknowledge that. But putting aside the experience thing, I think what first struck me was this, and I think it's a very positive thing. The hiring of Blake Butera, knowing his background, Paul Taboni knowing his background, these things are part of what has become an undeniable theme with this revamping of Nationals baseball operations. And that is, this is all about the team becoming better at drafting and player development. Those two things that we've talked about so much on this podcast as having plagued the Nats for years now. This is all about that. This is all about this team getting better at drafting and developing players. And, you know, if it comes at the expense of, well, we had to hire a manager who hasn't managed at anywhere higher than single A, I think right now, if you're Paul Taboni, you're willing to do that. Because what I think matters most right now is them getting their process in order, them getting this drafting and player development part of the organization in order and getting that settled and getting that situated. And then once you get that settled and situated, then everything else starts to fall in place. And with Butera, this very much seems to be all about getting the most out of the Nats' promising young players at the major league level. It's certainly not about a veteran manager with experience. That's crystal clear. And I don't know that it's really about wins and losses. You know, now what I think Taboni would say, and this is how I look at it, if you get the player development aspect of things in order, the wins will come. Like, I know a reaction to this hiring has been, well, this means that the Nats are going to continue on with a rebuild for another 3 to 5 years. Not necessarily. If this thing works the way Paul Taboni hopes that it works, the rebuild will be expedited. And the rebuild will go as it should have gone initially, which is, you know, 2 years, 3 years max, and then you're good to go. And I think that's the way Taboni's looking at this, of like, okay, we got to get this fixed of how we groom these guys, how we coach these guys, and then we can worry about everything else. And I feel like that's what this Blake Butera hiring is all about. This is basically, hey, we got to fix our process. He's part of the fix of the process. And if we fix the process, then the wins are going to come.
Yeah, I agree with you on all of that. What I would say is, he sounds like a very good person in that role, but I almost wonder if the role is more of like a roving minor league coordinator or something like that. What you're asking him to do now is to do the things that he's done for several years in the minor leagues at the big league level. Now, there's an argument to be made that the current big league roster, which is full of 22, 23, 24-year-olds, many of whom have talent but are very rough around the edges and at least to this point have not blossomed into the best versions of themselves. So there's an argument to be made that you do need that kind of teaching like you would in the minor leagues at the big league level. And that's probably the appeal here of what he could be for you. I'll be fascinated to see what his coaching staff looks like. I think the easy answer is to say you have to bring in at least one, if not multiple, but certainly like a bench coach who does have some more experience that can kind of guide him in the things that he's not used to yet. I think that's important. But above all else, it's about other instructors who can help teach these players to become better at the actual fundamentals of the game. So I think that's a big part of it. I think the other takeaway, and I agree with you that I want to wait and see to hear what they say, and more importantly, what they actually do with the roster they now assemble over the rest of the winter before I declare oh, they're punting on 2026 or anything like that. I don't know. It's certainly possible that this is an indication that they're thinking several years down the road as opposed to trying to win right now. But I think we need to still wait and see how the rest of this all goes before we make that kind of declaration. But the other takeaway I had from it is, and I kind of felt like this would be the case all along, is that you have a manager who I think in a lot of ways was hired because his approach is going to align very well with the front office's approach. And by that, what I mean is, I think you're going to have a situation where the president of baseball operations and the people who work for him are the ones truly dictating what kind of team this is going to be, how they play the game, what lineups look like, how bullpens should be used. And they're going to deliver that information to the manager and ask him to implement that plan for them. And that's different from the way it's been done here for a long time. Mike Rizzo was adamant that it was his job to assemble the 26-man roster, but then it was the manager's job to take those 26 players and do with them as he saw fit. Now, he might have had suggestions and even arguments at times about things, but he ultimately left it up to the manager to do that. Again, let's hear what they all have to say about it, but I feel like this is going to be more of the, hey, the front office is really calling the shots on all this, and we're hiring a manager who's going to implement what we're trying to do with this baseball team.
And personally, I don't have a problem with that if that's the direction that the Nats are going. Of course, what matters is that the right decisions are being made. But if Paul Taboni and his staff are making the right decisions, then there's nothing wrong with them saying to Butera and his staff, hey, this is what we want you to do. Go ahead and execute what we want you to do. You know, teams are very secretive about how they operate, but there is a belief that this is how the Dodgers operate, and the Dodgers are enjoying a lot of success. There is a belief that this is how the Yankees operate, and there's a lot of sensitivity about this in New York, that Aaron Boone gets dictated to by Brian Cashman and his baseball ops people. But if in fact that's true, listen, Yankees fans complain because the team doesn't win the World Series every year, but the Yankees have enjoyed a good bit of success with Boone as manager. This is the way that things are done by some of the best teams in the sport. So if the Nats are adopting that line of behavior, I don't have an issue with that.
Hey, Nats fans. After the exciting Nats game, have a listen to some relaxing solo piano music to unwind and help you go to sleep. I'm Tim Newmark, the composer of the Nats Chat theme song, and you can find my latest music on Spotify, Apple Music, Pandora, and anywhere you stream music. The song you're hearing now is called Improv in A-flat major, The End of the Road.
I think maybe when you initially get into the game and you're part of this younger demographic, right, like you think about just chasing players that maybe fit great on a spreadsheet, right? But there's so much more to it, right? And having played, like, I've experienced it as well and felt it as well, right? And as the game has continued to modernize, right, like placing a incredible amount of focus on creating a winning culture, you know, is front of mind for me.
Mark wrote a really good piece about Butera on massinsports.com. Also with a good piece on Butera, Jeff Passan, ESPN MLB insider for ESPN.com. From that piece, quote, with fluency in advanced metrics and the detail-oriented approach that has made Rays employees coveted by other teams, Butera was regarded in the industry as a future manager. His combination of managerial and player development experience appealed to the Nationals, whose hiring of Taboni, 35, gave them the youngest head of baseball operations as well. End quote. There was not a ton out there during this managerial search in terms of who was being talked to. I mean, the names that came up, we had, very interestingly, former Orioles manager Brandon Hyde. We had Craig Albernaz, who ended up being hired by the Orioles as their manager, and Albernaz actually has a very strong relationship with Blake Butera. And then, of course, Miguel Cairo came up. The Nats interviewed him, too. It would be interesting to know how many people did the Nats interview, who did they interview, and ultimately, was Blake Butera the number one choice? Was Craig Albernaz who the Nats wanted and the O's just happened to get him? Was there somebody else who Paul Taboni really wanted and the Nats didn't get him? I don't know that we'll ever get the answers to those questions, but we're kind of operating in the dark here in terms of the nature of this search and where Butera ranked in terms of the candidates in the mind of Paul Taboni.
Right. And I don't know if we'll get that because just based on the last few weeks, there was so little that was getting out about this process. And believe me, I as a beat writer and my colleagues who also cover this, you try to find out what you can. And it was pretty tight-lipped and close to the vest. I mean, the fact that his name had not even come out until the news that he was being hired, I think says something there. I'm pretty sure there were several more names of candidates for this job, and it's just the ones that got out that we've heard for one reason or another. Those were the ones that got leaked or that people figured out. I'm pretty sure there were others as well. This had been going on for several weeks, and I would be very curious to know, was he, from his first round of interviews, did he stand out from the pack where they said, this is the guy we want to zero in on? Or were there others they thought, we kind of like them all. Let's kind of see how this goes. The other factor here, and again, hopefully we will learn this in the coming days, we have no idea how long his contract is or how much money he's making. Now, you can assume that as the youngest major league manager in over 50 years, and as somebody who had minimal minor league experience, let alone any kind of major league experience, that he's probably going to be at the bottom of the depth chart in terms of major league managers, in terms of the length of his contract and the amount of money that he's making. So I don't think this is going to be a super long deal. I don't think this is somebody who's going to be making a ton of money from the outset. And you can decide what you think about that or not. We know the history of the Nationals when it came to hiring managers, and some very established managers who got short-term deals. And even in one case, in Bud Black's case, was offered a deal that he thought was unacceptable and didn't take it. And that created all kinds of confusion until they wound up with Dusty Baker. I don't know if that's the path they've gone back down here with this, but you would think, given his age, lack of experience, and everything else, this is probably somebody who is much more affordable on a shorter term deal than other managers. That doesn't mean he's the wrong choice or that somebody else would have been better if they were just willing to spend the money on him. I'm not going to say that. He makes sense in a lot of other ways, but it'll be interesting if we do finally get, any kind of detail on what kind of deal and how much job security does he has. But the other point you made before, and I think this is very much true, he and Taboni are now tied together. This is Taboni's first real significant move that he's made. And if it goes well, Taboni's going to get credit for it. If it doesn't, you have to hold him accountable for that as well. And so we'll see over the coming next few years. I feel like these two are truly tied at the hip now because of the circumstances of how they join the organization.
What I would love to know, what I would love to ask Paul Taboni if you, me, and him were at Walters having some beers is this. Is Blake Butera the manager who Paul Taboni envisions taking the Nats back to prominence? Or, okay, if Taboni's being honest, is Blake Butera the guy before the guy who takes the Nats back to prominence? Usually the way it works in a rebuild, right, is you have your quote-unquote rebuild manager, and then you say, hey, pal, thanks for the work, a salute for your service. You fire him, and then you bring in the guy who's going to get you over the top, who's going to get you past the hump. Is Blake Butera the guy who Paul Taboni envisions lasting through the rest of this rebuild, however it goes, and being the Nats manager the next time they make the postseason? Or does Taboni, and this is not something he would ever say publicly, nor, by the way, should he be saying this privately. This is only something he'd be thinking to himself. Does Taboni look at Butera as he can be our manager couple of seasons, and then once we really get good, then it's time to move on to someone with more experience, and that's when we go for it in terms of trying to make the postseason? I'd love to know what Paul Taboni is thinking in that regard.
I would love to know it too, and I have my suspicions there, but I think it's also, you got to find out. He's such an unknown entity right now that let's find out. Like, I understand that right now the X's and O's part probably isn't the number one priority for him, but there are going to come points here in his first season as manager where he's got to make some decisions about when to pull a starting pitcher, how far to push a reliever, who to play, who to sit, all these kinds of day-to-day decisions that a manager makes. And we don't know how he's going to handle that when the moment comes because he's never been there before. Maybe he shows that he is up to that task. And as the team gets older and gets better, maybe he kind of grows with them and is the guy for long term when they are ready to win. Or maybe it becomes clear that he's really more about just developing young players. And then when the time comes, they go get someone else. I found it ironic, I suppose, that on the same day that the news breaks they've hired a new manager, a photo was posted on social media by our old friend Manny Acta, the second manager in Nationals history, of him just happening to be having coffee with Jim Riggleman, the third manager in Nationals history. And there's an interesting comparison there to be made because what you just said, The reason Jim Riggleman quit the way he did is that he believed he was the guy before the guy. He saw them start to get to the point that he thought they were going to be ready to win. And when he wanted assurances that he'd be back for the 2012 season, Mike Rizzo and the Nationals said, no, we're not prepared to do that right now. And so he walked out. And who did they bring in? Davey Johnson, the guy who was the guy to take them to the next level and to the postseason. So it will be fascinating someday. Are we talking about Blake Butera in the same regard as a Manny Acta or Jim Riggleman? Or are we talking about him in the same regard as a Davey Johnson or even a Davey Martinez?
And you never know. I mean, I mentioned the Nats interviewing Brandon Hyde. Brandon Hyde was the Orioles manager for their rebuild, but then he also was the manager who took them to the playoffs. And so there are many ways that things can play out. By the way, what a troll job, Acta and Riggleman putting out that photo on a day on which we have Nats managerial news, right? You can't tell me that that's coincidence. There's got to be more to it than just that.
Walter's Happy Hour runs Monday through Friday from 4 to 7 p.m. The $5 happy hour menu includes the Meatball Trio and select draft beers.
So I've been texting back and forth with Miguel, right? What I didn't feel comfortable with is sharing something with you all that I haven't talked with Miguel about. You know, like I said, it's been 48 hours since I took the job. So I want to sit with Miguel and learn him as a person. More than anything, I want him to understand my vision for the role before sharing it with everyone. So hopefully you can respect that.
So when you look at Blake Butera, his time with the Rays, I mentioned he had been with the Rays in some capacity since June 2015, a player for the Rays 2015 to March 2017, a minor league coach for the Rays March 2017 to February 2018, a minor league manager for the Rays March 2018 to December 2022, a minor league field coordinator for the Rays December 2022, October 2023, and then he had been the Rays senior director of player development since October 2023. A variety of roles with the Rays. He is young numerically, but he does have a lot of baseball experience, and he has gotten to observe one of the best organizations in the sport in terms of drafting and player development. And, you know, it's a funny deal with the Rays, right? Because like you said, the success in terms of like championships has been very limited, right? But the Rays have had a good number of winning seasons, have vastly outplayed their payrolls over the years. And if you look around MLB over the last, say, 10, 15 years, so many hirings in terms of GMs and managers and coaches have been from the Rays. The Rays have become this like pipeline for how to do baseball ops, even though the Rays themselves, aren't like some dynasty. A lot of that, of course, is the money that the team spends on payroll. But it's interesting to look at Butera's resume and to see what he has done and to wonder if that can and will translate to being a manager at the MLB level. It really is actually a fascinating experiment when you think about this.
I was trying to think if there's anybody in baseball history or recent baseball history who's been named a big league manager with that kind of lack of upper level experience. And I couldn't come up with some. I know there are plenty of successful big league managers who never played in the big leagues. Jim Leland is one of those, for example, but he had been a minor league manager for quite a while before he took over the Pirates. You know, Tony La Russa was very young, but he, again, had minor league managerial experience. You know, and then it occurred to me that on the same day that this news came out, the San Francisco Giants introduced their new manager, Tony Vitello, who comes straight from college, never worked in the pros. Now, he's the head coach at the University of Tennessee, a big-time SEC program, and I would argue that that job is way higher profile and closer to the big leagues than anything that Blake Butera had done in the lower minor league levels. So it's not exactly an apples-to-apples comparison. But, I mean, it's pretty close to unprecedented for a major league team to hire someone like this at this stage of his career to be the manager. Now, it's entirely possible, and we started to hear it from some people who know him in the game, and as you described, like this may be somebody who was an up-and-comer who other people in the sport saw as a future big league manager and just needed a few more years in different capacities before he burst onto the scene and became a more well-known figure. And maybe Paul Taboni and the Nationals scooped him up before anybody else could do that to find him. And, you know, like a Rule 5 draft pick, You're not 100% sure if he's big league ready, but you believe in him. And so you're going to say, hey, we're putting you on the big league roster right now. We'll hope that it works out in the long run, and we'll take a chance on that before he ever gets a chance to make it with another team. Maybe that's part of the process here. But it's truly unprecedented, as far as I can tell, for somebody of his, it's not just the age, it's where the experience is, to suddenly be in charge of a major league team.
To use an analogy that ties to the NFL team of Washington, D.C., is this a Sean McVay situation where the guy is super young but also super ready? Sean McVay was 30 years old when the Los Angeles Rams in January 2017 hired him away from the Redskins. He had been the Skins' offensive coordinator to be head coach. And McVay had been viewed as a future head coach, but nobody knew that the future was now. Back then, it turned out to be a brilliant hire. And McVay has been one of the best head coaches in the NFL for years. And that is to say, those who can do. And I wonder if Taboni looked at Butera and was like, I see someone here who can be a great manager. And maybe that was part of the thinking. In terms of a comp, I'm not saying this is a perfect comp, but I think about Gabe Kapler. Do you remember when the Philadelphia Phillies hired Gabe Kapler as manager, October 2017? Kapler had not been a manager at the major league level, certainly. He had been working as the Dodgers' director of player development. This was seen as an outside-the-box hire. The Phillies at the time were really starting to embrace analytics. Kapler is a big analytics guy, very much a forward-thinking guy. A lot of people didn't know what to make of that hiring. He only lasted for 2 years as Phillies manager, but that was because ownership wanted to fire him, not because Phillies brass itself wanted to get rid of him. He went 80-82 in 2018, 81-81 in 2019, got fired by the Phillies, and immediately got gobbled up by San Francisco, was the Giants manager for 4 seasons, including a 107-win season in 2021. Again, it's not a perfect parallel because Kapler was more known, had been working for the Dodgers, had done a lot of different things in terms of his work for the Dodgers, but that was one of the things that hit me when I saw this Blake Butera news. Like, maybe this can play out like Kapler, with hopefully Butera lasting for longer than just 2 seasons as Kapler did with the Phillies.
Yeah, and I think the key there is that there was no real coaching experience. He was working in a front office role for the Dodgers. Another one that comes to mind in kind of a similar situation was A.J. Hinch, who people forget his first managerial job was with the Diamondbacks. And he was their farm director, something like that. When he was named to the job, people thought it was crazy. It didn't seem like the right kind of fit. Now, it didn't work out there. He went on to Houston, had a ton of success, left in disgrace after the sign stealing scandal, but now has reemerged in Detroit and led that team to the postseason. It's interesting. Both those names that we're talking about are guys who were sort of unconventional or very young, inexperienced hires, didn't succeed at their first place and then did succeed their second place. You hope that's not the case here with Butera. There is also this trend around baseball now to hire very recently retired managers who don't have any coaching or managerial experience. The Angels just hired Kurt Suzuki, former Nats catcher from the World Series team. You had the Guardians with Stephen Vogt. That was shortly after he retired as a player. Go back to David Ross with the Cubs in a similar situation. The difference for all these guys we just mentioned there versus Butera is those guys all played in the major leagues, and Butera never came close to that. So I keep coming back to this point. It may not prove important in the end, but to me, that's his number one challenge walking in the door. You've never been a big leaguer in any regard. How do you show everyone that you deserve their respect and that you can manage a big league team when you've never been a part of a big league team in any capacity before?
Kurt Suzuki, by the way, reportedly got a 1-year contract. How about that? You hire a new manager and you give him a mere 1-year contract. Talk about neutering your skipper before he ever manages a single game for you. A 1-year contract. That's going to be really interesting to see how that goes. So when it comes to Blake Butera's coaching staff, he's never managed above single A. Do you think Butera calls the shots on his coaching staff? Do you think Paul Taboni picks the coaches? How do you think the selection of the coaching staff, what is a very crucial aspect of this baseball ops revamp, the Nats major league coaching staff, how do you think that's going to go? Who do you think is truly dictating that?
Yeah, very much so. That's why I said in a lot of ways, I think that's as important as whoever the manager is going to be. I'm sure he'll be involved in the process. I would be stunned if he has the authority to actually hire guys on his own. Maybe he's given one or two of like his guys, people that he's worked with in the past, for all we know. But I've got to believe that this is like a lot else that I think is going to happen. This is going to be coming from the top of the organization and working its way down. You have to give a lot of careful consideration, I think, to these positions and ultimately pick people who all align with that same vision that you have. I think one of the key points you heard Taboni say at his introductory press conference is that he wants to kind of create a Nationals way. We all do things the same way from the top of the organization all the way down to the minor leagues. And so you do need to hire people who fit the same mold, who have the same mindset, or at least are willing to adapt to that and go along with what you want them to be. So I think you do need some people with some experience, but you may also find some other unconventional decisions there. My guess is that these are being hired by the front office much more than they're being hired by the manager, given his lack of experience. And just, I think they want this to be a collaborative production that they're doing here. They want everyone on the same page. And then, does anybody from Davey Martinez's old staff return? I do think there is a chance of a few, like a Sean Doolittle, who might fit in with what they're saying. I know Chris Johnson, the assistant hitting coach, is somebody who's a little more into analytics and could be a part of it. And then, like I said, when it comes to maybe some of their player development people, minor league staff, like a Matt LeCroy, who has been with the organization for a very long time, very well respected, already knows all these players. He managed them all in Rochester before they got to the big leagues. Somebody like that, to me, would make sense. But let's see. He has no relationship with Taboni or with Butera, as far as we know. But you'd like to think that somebody with some institutional knowledge would be of a help to you in some regard.
Yeah, and a whole lot of institutional knowledge was chopped off just a few weeks ago. This is our first episode of the podcast since the end of the Nats season. And since the end of that season, we have had, which you might call Black Wednesday, October 8th, reports pouring out of a bunch of firings of the Nats in terms of front office personnel. Vice President and Assistant General Manager of Player Development and Administration, Eddie Longo's gone. Assistant GM Player Personnel, Mark Shalaba, gone. Director of Athletic Training, Paul Lassard, gone. Multiple scouts, gone. Our friend Barry Zverluga, columnist for the Washington Post, he in a post on X that day said that one scout described that day as, quote, one scout described that day, quote, as a bloodbath, end quote. Now, interim GM Mike DeBartolo is staying on, so it's not like everyone got whacked, but, I mean, there is massive change going on right now. And so I can only imagine Paul Taboni, he gets to work each day. All of the things that he has on his desk, on his mind in terms of what to do, roles to fill, there's a lot happening here. It really wasn't that surprising that the managerial search took some time. But as we just discussed, even though the managerial search is done, there's now a coaching staff to be filled out, and there is still a ton to be done in terms of filling out the front office and forming it and molding it in the way that Paul Taboni sees fit.
It really was a massive task for him when he got the job as an outsider who's given the authority to reshape it, and he is certainly reshaping it. It's interesting that at least the first front office hires that he's made have, for the most part, been people who he had a connection with through the Red Sox, either most recently or maybe in the past had been with them. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but he certainly has surrounded himself, at least at the outset, with some people that he already knows and has a relationship with. Did keep DeBartolo. We still don't know the exact title of his role. I think it's becoming clear that that's not going to actually be the GM in name. He may be the number 2 guy, so to speak, but maybe not have the title of the GM. And I wasn't shocked. Some of the individual names I was very disappointed to hear, because there are some people who had worked there for a very long time and very well regarded people, not just with the Nationals, but around the sport, and people that you would think probably didn't have a whole lot of responsibility for how the team had done in recent years. But you can understand, you want to clean house and reshape this in your own image, and that's fine. It's his right to do that as the new head of the baseball operations department. There's still a lot to do, and that's in the front office, that's the coaching staff. We haven't even gotten to the roster. There's a whole lot for them to do to assemble a roster that we're going to see ultimately on opening day of 2026. So it's really just starting. I think it made sense that the first moves he was going to make were going to be his top guys in the front office. And then they probably collectively worked on hiring the manager. And now next up, I would think the coaching staff is high on the list.
Well, Paul Taboni at his introductory presser as Nats president of baseball operations on October 1st said that he wants to create a, quote, scouting and player development monster, end quote. That was one of the great quotes from that presser, and that journey has begun. Blake Butera being hired as Nats manager. We get so much great feedback on this show. You tell us what you think about what's happening here with the Nats. Hit us up on X at Nats_chat. You can find us on Blue Sky at Nats Chat Podcast. You can email us natschatpodcast@gmail.com. We are planning on doing another episode after the introductory press conference for Blake Butera, and we are anticipating that next week. Is that correct?
I think so. We have not heard officially yet. MLB requires all these things to wait till after the World Series is over. The GM meetings then happen the week after that, I think, starting on the 10th. So it would make sense that sometime in the next week they would have this, but I think they're still working on the exact details of how that's going to go and when it's going to be.
All right. Well, stay tuned. We look forward to our next conversation. Until then, we thank you for listening. For Mark Zuckerman, I'm Al Galdi, and we'll talk to you next time on the Nats Chat Podcast.
Welcome back to the Anglers Extra Pregame Show. Time now for the catch of the day. I'm Keith Zubro. Today we have Blake Butera. Blake, how you doing?
Good, how are you?
I'm good. Another beautiful day out here. Great day to play baseball in Brewster. You guys are 5-0 against them. What is it about this team against the Whitecaps that gets the job done every time?
I mean, it seems like we always come out to play against these guys, like we try to do every day. But, I mean, just against these guys, we've been really good so far this season, and hopefully we end it pretty good today.
Is there somebody you model your game after?
I'd like to say Dustin Pedroia. I mean, we're not the tallest guys, obviously. But, I mean, he plays the game hard, and he plays the game the right way with passion. And I like to model myself after him because he's just such a great player.